The year is 2022, and my friend Xirto asks if I can make him a little animated loop, similar to the one I used at my channel at the time, to use as an outro. He included a prompt as well, to have him sitting over a cliff, looking out onto a wasteland. I, for some reason, almost spilt tea on myself, and the topic shifts onto what game we should play later that evening. But the request stayed in the back of my mind. Over the months, I made attempts to see what I can make, but my familiarity with my drawing software of choice at the time was still limited, and my attempts were met with a loss of interest and a lack of confidence. The project went further into the back of my mind as I focused on more things and worked on other projects. And now, at the time of recording, being 8 months after the request, I have decided to give it another shot. Those projects mentioned before gave me both experience and confidence in my ability to create this looping outro for Xirto. One of the reasons I wasn't able to finish the request when I first started was because of two things I lacked experience in. One being my lack of ability to draw a landscape background of a wasteland, by the way, that I felt happy with. It was much harder than you would think. And my ability to animate in a software that I was brand new at. And also, a big reason in my opinion, was that there was no set character or persona that Xirto used. When I looked at the prompt of the wasteland, I thought of a few references I could use. Stuff like Fallout, Borderlands, Mad Max, and the reference I was provided by Xirto. The problem I ran into, though, was that my mind could only come up with deserts and dry fields or flattened cities. This resulted in my mind refusing to justify a cliff placement. Why not a desert? Because my brain said that if Xirto wanted a desert, he would have mentioned it. Why not a city? Because why would there be a cliff near or in a city? I also had trouble detailing a desert or flat city in a way that didn't feel bland or too detailed. If I drew stuff too small, the scale of the wasteland would feel too far. And if I drew stuff too close together, the scene would have looked constructed and fake in a way that I was not trying to replicate. This juggling and mental gymnastics in my brain is what kept me from making any progress in this project. Whatever few attempts I did make ended up looking muddy and rushed. And during planning, I could barely come up with a position or pose for Xirto due to the lack of knowing what he was going to look like. But luckily, one of the things I worked on during the 8 months between me picking this challenge up again was a video where I created character sheets for cheddar cheese, myself, and Xirto, meaning I now had something to reference and an idea of what he was going to look like. This was a big hurdle I had crossed, and I didn't even realize it for a while. But once I did realize it, I was able to focus on other aspects. But to do that, I would have to go back to square one and start with the composition of the scene. And at the time, I was studying perspective. Very simple, I know, but it was the fundamental that I ended up finding ways to improve my knowledge on. More specifically, finding the vanishing points of a scene and being able to accurately use them as reference when they are outside of the canvas. Xirto had a very useful 2-point perspective tool to find the planes. To use it properly for what I needed, I had to reverse engineer the scene, envisioning a cube that would fit perfectly in the scene's perspective. Draw it out, then I would align the tool's lines until they matched the cube. Then I erased the cube and had the perspective grid that I could use. Afterward, I added foreground elements that would help frame the wasteland in the scene and the character of Xirto who would be sticking out of it, that was framing the center of the scene. When adding detail to the plane, I went for at least 3 main elements to define it as a wasteland. This included a broken sign with the logo of Xirto's previous channel name, a wrecked car, and a bunker across a broken, crumbling road. There is also a sketch of a big crater in the back, but the size I was envisioning in the sketch did not match up with the rest of the elements, and I eventually decided to leave it out of the scene, and was replaced with a bunch of trees in the background. I then started to choose the values for each part of the landscape, separating the foreground, midground, and background focus of the scene. Once the values were placed, I went on to adding the base colors for all the elements. The trees in the background were bunched into a big shape, which could have been improved on with more detail, but I wasn't confident enough with how well I could do that in a way that doesn't distract from the more important focus points. I started adding the line art once I got closer to where the metaphorical camera would be to make it easier to color. As for texturing, I found that I liked using Xirto's watercolor blur tool on a multiply layer, giving a rougher look to the piece which I think fits the wasteland theme. Once the background was finished, I could add Xirto and a looping animation to do it. I sketched out a box in perspective to get a better visualization for myself of where he would be and to help me get the correct scale of his body for the scene and perspective. I would say that my anatomy knowledge when I animated this was about beginner level, as I was using multiple methods that would help me when drawing the line art. I tried to keep his head outline as basic as possible to make it easy to actually turn before adding the line art onto the moving part. I also decided to redraw the whole pose for every frame where the head moves, to not make it seem like the head was a separate element from the rest of the body. Once I had finished animating the line art, I had to fill in each frame with the right colors, and then go back and add all the shadows. And yeah, that was probably the most time-consuming part for me. Once I finished that though, I decided to go back and add a changing texture, animated on twos, to add more interest onto Xirto, and so that the shadow doesn't stay still while he is moving. And once that was done, I was finished. And in Xirto's own words, the outro goes hard. As for my personal retrospect, I think this is one of those art projects that I was actually happy with the end results. I did notice that the scaling between the bunker and the trees made it seem like the forest grew to around hip height instead of an actual forest, which is something that I'll have to keep in mind with any future projects. And looking for more art references in the beginning would have helped with my art block as well. If you managed to make it this far into the video, leave a comment with the carbonated apple in it to let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. And thank you for sticking around till the very end. Although Xirto hasn't been uploading in his personal channel in a while, subscribe to him as well and see what he's been cooking. You can also see him in the group channel that we have with Cheddar Cheese called CC Deserters, where our gaming sessions ended up since I've been focusing more on art recently.